Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into a source that, honestly, it presents a real puzzle in the world of, the ultra wealthy.
Right.
When you think about a fortune like, $14.3 billion, you usually picture these huge personalities, right? Viral tweets, constant media.
Oh, yeah, cameras everywhere. Constant noise.
Exactly. But the subject today, Shahid Khan, he's built this massive empire, one of the most impressive, really, operating almost completely under the radar.
And that's the thing, isn't it? That silence. The fact that he can maintain that level of, let's call it strategic quietness while controlling these huge assets, that's the core mystery we're trying to unpack today. Our source material paints a picture of a guy who, unless you're maybe a diehard NFL fan or deep into industrial supply chains, you might barely know he exists.
Right, you might not.
But the way he's built his influence, this sort of quiet, methodical climb, it actually genuinely makes other billionaires a bit nervous because they just can't seem to track his playbook. It's not flashy.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's not the money itself that's alarming them. It's the fact that he apparently doesn't need the public attention to keep growing it.
Precisely. He operates differently.
So our mission today really is to unpack that specific mindset. How does he use financial leverage in such a unique way? And the sheer boldness of his cross-industry control. How did that let him kind of rewrite the rules for building wealth?
Yeah, it's about understanding that hidden power, the kind that doesn't need the spotlight.
Okay, let's dig into this journey then, because the origin story, it feels like the foundation, that scarcity he started with, is really the key to understanding everything that followed.
It really is. I mean, it's the classic American dream narrative almost, but built on engineering grit and sheer necessity, not just, luck or timing.
Right.
Khan comes to the U.S. He's 16 years old.
Right.
And the source is clear on this. He lands with exactly $500. That's it.
$500.
Yeah. He wasn't showing up with, family seed money or connections already lined up. His focus was pure survival, basically.
Just think about that for a second. It's 1967. $500 is your entire world. He's not dreaming of IPOs or billion-dollar deals at that point.
Not at all.
He's laser-focused on getting an engineering degree, University of Illinois. And that tuition, the rent, food, it all had to be funded, immediately from scratch.
Which brings us to his first job. And it's so telling, isn't it? He takes the only job available, washing dishes, for $1.20 an hour.
Wow. $1.20, yeah.
And this wasn't just, beer money. The sources really stress this, that intense physical labor was the only way he paid for his education. That daily grind, earning $1.20 for every single hour. It had to fundamentally shape how he viewed value, how he viewed money.
You have to figure for him, every single dollar wasn't just currency. It represented, 50 minutes of scrubbing pots and pans.
Yeah.
That's a really deep physical understanding of the cost of capital, much different than just seeing numbers on a screen.
Absolutely. That early, intense relationship with money rooted in scarcity, absolute necessity, and, the precision engineering requires it became the mental blueprint for his multi-billion-dollar approach later on.
How so?
Well, when you start out having to literally count every penny just to afford ramen and textbooks, you develop this intrinsic ability to see the necessary function of every single bit of capital you get later. There's just zero tolerance for waste, no room for inefficiency. It has to work.
Okay, that context really sets the stage perfectly for our first big theme here, his financial mindset. Because it seems fundamentally different from the usual playbook you see with the super rich.
Yeah, this is fascinating. It starts with how he even defines capital.
Right.
If you look at the typical ultra-wealthy crowd, the hedge fund guys, the tech founders' money often gets framed as free, right?
Sure. Freedom from things, freedom to buy yachts, freedom from a 9-to-5.
Exactly. Freedom to indulge, freedom to display status. Khan just completely flips that definition.
He sees money not as freedom, but as leverage. The sources highlight this really well with a quote from him, something like, "You have to think about money not in terms of how much you have, but what it allows you to do, who it lets you become."
Yes. It's about potential energy, potential action, not just static value sitting in an account.
So it's not about hoarding it, it's about using it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That changes the whole strategy. It moves from passive accumulation, just watching the numbers go up, to active deployment. You could almost call it capital cycling.
Cycling?
Yeah. He's not piling up cash just to have a safety net, though I'm sure he has one. He seems to view cash almost like an oxidizing asset. If it's just sitting there, it's actually losing potential, losing value in terms of what it could be doing.
So he pushes it out.
Immediately. Into factories, into sports franchises, and crucially, into places where it builds strategic influence. Every dollar has a job. And that job seems to be creating leverage in some new, necessary part of the economy or culture.
Okay, and his first really big move perfectly illustrates this idea, right? Cycling capital into foundational leverage, not flashy assets. It wasn't software, it wasn't trendy real estate.
Nope. It was completely unsexy. He bought Flex Endgate in 1980.
The company where he used to work as an engineer.
Exactly. So, yeah, it was familiar territory, a grounded business, but it was absolutely not a glamorous acquisition by 1980 standards. He wasn't chasing the hot new thing. He was looking for control over something essential, something industrial.
And the genius of it, according to the sources, is entirely in which industry he chose. Auto parts, specifically making lightweight, efficient car bumpers and other components. In the 80s, that was seen as what? Mature? Low margin? Kind of boring, especially compared to the boom happening in Silicon Valley or the huge returns promised on Wall Street.
And that boring quality, that was the strategic edge. That choice gave him control over a critical choke point in the automotive supply chain.
Explain that. Choke point.
Think about it. Every single car, every truck needs these basic components. Bumpers, support structures. They are non-negotiable parts, but they aren't the engine. They aren't the flashy infotainment system. So they don't attract the same intense competition or scrutiny as those high-profile, high-tech parts.
So he's basically making himself indispensable, but quietly. If you're a huge automaker, the hassle and cost of switching suppliers for something high volume like bumpers, it must be enormous. Retooling factories, recertifying parts, integrating them into the assembly line.
It's a nightmare for them. So by establishing Flex Endgate as the super reliable, high-quality, just-in-time supplier, he effectively limits the automaker's power to just switch on a whim. He builds deep roots.
That is the definition of a choke point. While other companies are out there fighting for consumer eyeballs and brand awareness,
Khan is quietly embedding himself into the essential manufacturing infrastructure, and he did it incredibly well. By the mid-2000s, Flex Endgate was a key supplier for giants like Toyota in North America. And you know Toyota's just-in-time manufacturing model.
oh yeah, legendary. Demands incredible precision, zero mistakes, perfect timing.
Exactly. He met that standard, which cemented his position.
And the scale today is it's staggering, but still mostly invisible to the average person on the street. The source material says by 2025, the company is estimated to supply parts for nearly every major automaker in North America.
Think about that. That gives him this enormous behind-the-scenes influence over a multi-trillion-dollar global industry, but he doesn't get, or seem to seek, a single front-page headline for the manufacturing side of his empire.
That's the critical takeaway for you listening. While, the tech billionaires are making headlines every day.
Khan is securing contracts, decades-long contracts, and controlling the foundational infrastructure that everyone else relies on.
It really suggests that these enduring empires, the really solid ones, often start in these overlooked industrial spaces that maybe nobody else wanted, because that's where you gain control, where competition is lower, but the necessity is absolute.
He chose longevity and essential control over, fleeting hype or buzz.
And that commitment to longevity, it's reinforced by the second major thing that sets him apart, his behavioral edge.
The strategic silence we talked about. It's not just an accident of being in manufacturing. It seems like an active, deliberate choice.
No, absolutely. The next big piece of his profile is this complete aversion to the high drama, high visibility theatrics that define so much of modern billionaire culture.
Right. You just don't see him engaging in Twitter wars.
No viral sound bites.
None of the usual billionaire flexes, showing off rockets or islands or whatever.
Exactly. And the sources really frame this lack of public persona, this calculated quietness, as a source of immense strength. It allows for predictability and focus internally.
You look at his peers, and so many seem to be chasing the latest productivity fad, right?
Right.
The 4 a.m. ice baths, the dopamine detoxes, the extreme biohacking, all aimed at peak but maybe unsustainable performance.
Yeah, always looking for the next edge, the next hack. Khan, on the other hand, seems to emphasize just compound consistency, deep, methodical, repeatable execution. He runs his empire like a meticulously maintained machine, not like a volatile tech startup constantly pivoting.
It's like he's the master mechanic, not the flashy showman. He's focused on maintaining the critical systems, ensuring they run smoothly day after day, rather than constantly chasing shiny new parts or performing for an audience.
And we get a little glimpse into his world, right? The sources suggest his daily routine is structured around this quiet control.
Very much so. reviewing performance metrics, detailed metrics across both the manufacturing plants and the sports teams, meeting with his core leadership teams, reading dense briefings on everything from emerging auto industry trends to, deep football analytics for the Jaguars.
It sounds relentless but controlled. It's a systematic approach where each day builds methodically on the last. The result is this compounding influence rather than sudden, unpredictable spikes.
And that daily discipline, executed across these huge, very different operations, manufacturing, sports, wrestling, without any apparent need for public validation or celebrity status. That's what seems to genuinely unsettle his peers.
Because they can't figure out his rhythm.
Maybe. Or they can't predict his next big move because it's not driven by ego or headlines. It's driven by this rigorous internal system focused purely on long-term performance and leverage. Billionaires who crave the spotlight often become predictable because of that craving.
Interesting point.
Khan's discipline means his actions are dedicated solely to the internal health and strategic positioning of his enterprises. And that behavioral edge, that quiet consistency, is what enables his philosophy on risk, which is also profoundly different.
How so? Most people, certainly in business, you think of risk as something you try to mitigate, something you overcome to reach stability, especially once you're already wealthy.
Right. Risk is often seen as a temporary hurdle, a phase to survive on the path to security. For Khan, it seems risk is more like the ongoing entry fee you pay to gain and maintain real power. It's not something to be eliminated once you hit a certain net worth.
So it's not something you outgrow.
Doesn't seem like it.
Right.
Looks like a permanent operating principle,
Yep.
but one that has to be managed with absolute mastery, not just survived. And you take these calculated, highly leveraged risks that, frankly, most traditional manufacturing tycoons would probably shy away from.
And the prime example of this has to be 2011, the watershed moment, buying the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Oh, yeah. A struggling NFL franchise for roughly $770 million.
Which made him the first ethnic minority majority owner in NFL history.
Right, correct. A huge milestone in itself. But at the time, so many analysts and observers saw it as just reckless diversification. Or worse, a pure vanity purchase.
Yeah, the narrative was, here's a guy who built his fortune on the predictable, steady cash flow of automotive supply chains. Why on earth is he jumping into the hyper-unpredictable, high-drama world of professional sports? And buying one of the least successful teams, no less?
And the answer really reveals the depth of his thinking about leverage. He wasn't just buying a football team to, sit in the owner's box on Sundays. He was buying access and a type of social and political capital that manufacturing alone could never, ever provide.
Access to what, specifically?
Well, instantly, the purchase gave him a prominent seat at the table in one of America's most powerful and closed industries, the NFL. That means access to stadium negotiations, complex municipal partnerships, high-level political connections, and a massive media platform. It's an arena where real power and influence circulate, often completely behind closed doors.
So it wasn't just about sports, it was a strategic positioning play. It diversified his brand, sure, but maybe more importantly, it significantly boosted his negotiating weight in other areas, like infrastructure, real estate development, especially around the stadium projects that are so key to the Jaguars' future in Jacksonville.
Exactly. It gave him leverage in entirely new dimensions, and he clearly liked the taste of it because he didn't stop there.
Right. What came next?
2 years later, 2013, he buys Fulham FC, a historic English football club in London.
Okay, so jumping across the pond now, why Fulham?
Well, again, think access and footprint. This move gave him a direct, legitimate presence in the massive European sports market. It opens doors in international media circles, potentially in diplomacy, and plugs him into those elite global networks that center around European football.
And then, more recently, and maybe the most surprising move to some, was co-founding All Elite Wrestling, AEW, with his son, Tony.
Yeah, AEW, on the surface, is professional wrestling, an industry that, let's be honest, is often dismissed by the mainstream as sort of lowbrow entertainment.
But strategically.
Strategically, wrestling connects directly and very efficiently with younger demographics, Gen Z especially. It plugs him right into the heart of streaming platform wars, global branding opportunities, and merchandise pipelines. And look how quickly AEW grew. It genuinely started challenging the decades-long dominance of WWE almost overnight.
So when you look at the whole portfolio, car bumpers, an NFL team, a UK football club, a wrestling federation, it seems almost random at first glance. Scattered.
It does seem scattered. But the source argues these were all carefully considered long-term positioning plays, each one designed to deepen his cultural capital, expand his global footprint, and build influence with new digitally savvy demographics. The wrestling venture, in particular, seems aimed squarely at capturing the attention and loyalty of Gen Z fandoms, a massively powerful audience for future media and consumer trends.
It sounds like he's operating on a different timescale with a different metric, maybe something like strategic inevitability.
That's a great way to put it, strategic inevitability. He seems to believe in starting positions that might look uncertain, a struggling team, a brand new wrestling league taking on a giant league, but that, if managed with his kind of system and discipline, are designed to lead to unavoidable dominant market positions down the road.
So he's measuring success not by the short-term noise, like the Jaguars' win-loss record in any given season.
Which can be frustratingly volatile.
Right. But by ensuring his overall empire is positioned to control these crucial intersections of industry, culture, media, infrastructure, like 10, 20 years from now.
Exactly. Risk for Khan isn't something to fear. It's just the cost of renting the future he intends to eventually own. But, and this is key, only if that risk is managed relentlessly by his disciplined system.
Okay, that brings us perfectly to maybe the most complex but defining aspect of his success, how he actually manages all these seemingly disconnected pieces, how he built this power matrix. Let's talk about him as a true system architect.
Yeah, this is where his strategy really breaks from the mold. You know, most billionaires, they achieve dominance by digging one really deep trench in a single industry, a single vertical. Maybe it's tech, maybe finance, maybe energy.
They go deep, not necessarily wide.
Exactly. Khan actively challenges that model. He seems to deliberately build these high-level bridges across different verticals, and that makes him a much more complex, multi-layered player, harder to pin down.
And the sources suggest that each asset isn't just sitting there in its own silo. They're strategically deployed to actually amplify the others. It creates this sort of web of control.
A web is a good word for it. It makes him impossible to categorize neatly if you try to box him in as just a manufacturer.
He pulls out the global sports network card, right? The goodwill, the negotiating leverage that comes with owning teams in the NFL and English Premier League.
Precisely. And if you try to dismiss him as just a sports guy, a magnate dabbling in teams,
he quietly reminds you that he controls critical supply chains that the entire global auto economy depends on. You can't build cars without his parts.
It's that interplay. Let's break down the synergy a bit. Flex and Gate, the manufacturing core, that provides the enormous predictable production power. And crucially, the reliable cash flow that can finance the riskier, more volatile, but potentially higher growth assets like sports and media.
Okay, so the factory funds the fun, in a way.
Or funds the strategic fun, maybe.
Yeah.
Then you take the Jacksonville Jaguars. Even when they're, struggling on the field, owning that team gives him immediate, significant negotiating weight with local and state governments. Think stadium deals, land acquisition around the stadium, infrastructure investment.
And that expertise in real estate negotiation, dealing with municipalities, that's directly transferable back to managing his global manufacturing footprint, finding sites for new factories, navigating local regulations.
Absolutely. Then you layer on the cultural assets. Owning Fulham FC in London. That opens doors.
Yeah.
Crucial diplomatic channels, maybe. Media access in Europe. Connections to established international business networks. It could potentially smooth the path for Flex and Gate's expansion abroad, or just provide high-level networking in diverse global capitals.
Right. It's soft power, but with real economic implications.
And then AEW, the Wrestling Federation.
Yeah.
That provides something entirely different again. It's this highly flexible, dynamic asset giving him direct access to the digital media landscape, the streaming wars, global branding pipelines. It lets him leverage pop culture, youth culture to increase his overall visibility and cultural resonance, especially with younger generations who might not care about car parts or even traditional football.
So he's blending brand, hard infrastructure, cultural influence. He's not just wealthy in dollars.
Exactly. He's woven into the fundamental structure of key industries globally. Manufacturing, sports, media, entertainment. This complexity, this refusal to be confined to just one sector, makes him unpredictable. And, as the sources suggest, genuinely uncomfortable for other power players who prefer knowing exactly what game their rivals are playing.
Because Khan is playing like 4 different games at once.
And they all feed each other in ways that aren't immediately obvious from the outside.
It really underscores that true influence isn't just about how many assets you have. It's about the quality of the connections between those assets, how they act as force multipliers for each other.
Well put.
And that mastery of complex systems, it's apparently never more clear than when things go wrong. Which brings us to our final major section, his approach to crisis mastery. His unique ability, it seems, to restructure and even advance while others are just trying to survive.
This is a really critical philosophical point that comes through in the source material. When crisis hits, could be an economic recession, could be massive supply chain disruptions like we saw recently, could even be a disastrous season for one of his teams. The typical reaction is to contract, right?
Yeah, cut costs, lay people off, batten down the hatches, wait for the storm to pass.
Khan seems to do none of that. He appears to view crisis not as chaos to be endured, but as a clear signal. A signal that something in the system is broken or outdated, and it's time to rebuild it smarter. He sees turbulence almost as a mechanism that brutally exposes flaws, creating an opportunity for what the source calls a forced upgrade.
A forced upgrade. I like that. Do we have examples?
We have a couple of really good anecdotes that illustrate this architectural systemic approach. Take the Jacksonville Jaguars' really disappointing 2023 season. Instead of the usual reactive response you see in sports, firing a coach or GM, as a highly visible scapegoat.
Which happens all the time.
All the time. Khan publicly framed it differently. He called it an organizational failure, not an individual one.
Okay. Subtle but important distinction.
Hugely important. He took this profoundly systemic view. He didn't just focus on the player's performance on the field or one coach's decisions. He looked at the entire pipeline, the structure supporting the team. This led to a major overhaul of the football operations structure, retooling their whole analytics department and issuing a fresh mandate focused on long-term talent development and scouting processes.
So it was architectural, not just reactive punishment. He looked at the whole system, diagnosed the weak points, maybe how they scouted talent versus how they developed it, and then restructured the entire operational flow.
It's the exact same logic an engineer would apply to a malfunctioning machine in one of his factories. You don't just replace one gear, you figure out why the gear failed and redesign the system around it.
And he applied this same thinking to his core manufacturing business, Flex Gate, during those huge global supply chain disruptions in the early 2020s.
Absolutely. When soaring shipping costs and logistical chaos hit the auto industry hard.
Which was brutal for manufacturers.
Brutal. Flex Gate didn't just, stall production and wait for container ship rates to magically drop back to normal. They apparently used the crisis as a catalyst to become more resilient, more anti-fragile.
How did they do that?
They adapted aggressively. They diversified their sourcing for raw materials so they weren't reliant on just one region. They started shifting production centers geographically closer to the final auto assembly plants to cut down on long, vulnerable shipping routes. And they invested heavily in building up more localized logistics networks.
So they saw the broken system, that old, comfortable reliance on these decades-long, highly complex, globalized supply chains, and they used the intense pressure of the crisis to rebuild with a logic designed to withstand future shocks, making the whole enterprise more robust.
That seems to be the core belief. Systems break down sometimes, and when they do, they reveal what's no longer working, what no longer scales effectively in the current reality. The biggest mistake in this view is clinging stubbornly to the old, comfortable processes just because they used to work.
When reality has clearly shifted.
Exactly. Khan's strategy seems to be analyze the failure deeply, understand the new constraints, and then act decisively, even under pressure, using that very pressure to make the entire enterprise stronger in the long run, not just hold its ground.
So he doesn't just weather storms.
He seems to try and harness their energy for what you could call compulsory improvement, a forced upgrade.
Okay, so bringing all these different threads together then, this deep dive really makes it clear. Khan doesn't intimidate by being the loudest guy in the room or the flashiest billionaire on Twitter.
Not at all.
He unnerves his peers, it seems, because he's relentlessly focused on engineering longevity, on building these complex, interconnected systems that are designed to absorb shocks, learn from them, and actually emerge stronger. He's not chasing momentary hype or quarterly earnings reports, quite like others might be.
He's operating at this really interesting nexus of raw production power through Flex Gate and significant cultural influence through the sports and entertainment assets. He dominates crucial supply chains, negotiates massive stadium deals, and leverages strategic silence masterfully.
He stays unseen, or at least underestimated, until competitors suddenly realize he controls key infrastructure, key markets, key audiences that they need access to.
Which means he's often several steps ahead, building that structural, strategic inevitability we talked about, rather than just riding waves of short-term market volatility.
And that, I think, at the end of the day, is the deeper truth we've kind of uncovered here today. Real, enduring power often doesn't need to announce itself with trumpets and fanfare.
Yeah, it compounds. Slowly, silently, often invisibly. Through deliberate strategic choices, relentless discipline, and quiet control over crucial, often unglamorous, infrastructure.
So if you take one final thought away from this deep dive with you,
Maybe consider the power in Khan's choice, his framing, to treat every significant challenge or crisis, whether it's a terrible football season or a global supply chain meltdown, not as a setback or a failure, but as a forced upgrade, an unavoidable opportunity to get smarter, stronger, more resilient.
yeah, ask yourself, how could that philosophy actually apply? The idea of restructuring, rebuilding smarter because of the pressure, not in spite of it. How could that apply to the challenges you might be facing right now? In your career, maybe your finances, or even just in the personal systems you rely on every day?
Where could you potentially gain control over your own unglamorous but indispensable choke points? Something to think about.